Animating Illustrator layers. To animate Illustrator layers, our toolset will include the basic transformations we've covered extensively throughout this course, namely position, rotation, scale, opacity. Since we've already covered most of the basics, like how to animate our position to follow a path, or how to ease or hold our keyframe interpolations, we'll move on to animating the scene we have on screen. Along the way, I'll show you how to make your animation look more polished. I'll start animating and talk about faking the inertia of moving objects in the animation, and how we can easily translate that into keyframes. As we know from real-life physics, an object moving at a certain speed cannot just suddenly stop in its tracks, because it would look unnatural. What will actually happen is that the object will try to stop, but because of inertia, the movement will carry on and move past the stopping position before easing back to it. This is something we can easily fake with our position, rotation, and scale parameters, and it will make our animation look more realistic. Let's start with the position parameter. I'll add the keyframe to the final position of the layer, and then I'll move it to the 1 second mark. Next, with our layer selected, I'll click on my right arrow twice to try to create a small overshoot of where my final position will be. Just a quick note, the amount of zoom you're working in will affect how much the object is moved using the keyboard arrows, as you can see on my screen. Now I'll move that keyframe to around 2/3 of the first second of the animation. Finally, I'll take the layer and move it outside the composition bounds in the opposite direction of where the last overshoot keyframe is. If I now play the animation, you'll see that just by adding that extra keyframe, my animation feels more organic. Let's do the same thing with the rotation and the scale of the other layers. For the rotation, I know my object's final position will be at a rotation of 0 degrees, so I'll overshoot it by 2 degrees and set my first keyframe to -90. As for the scale, I'll overshoot to 102 and set my first keyframe to 0. If we now play the animation, you'll notice that even though it's subtle, the movement now feels more natural. For comparison, I'll erase the overshoot keyframes and play the animation so you can better see this effect in action. We can do this not only for objects stopping, but for objects that start to move by doing the overshoot in the opposite direction of the value. This way we can add more organic movements to our objects as they enter or exit our scenes. If we want, we can also add opacity to the animation, going from 0 to 100, but we need the opacity to reach 100 on the overshoot keyframe rather than in the final one, otherwise this will look wrong. Remember that you can extend or reduce the duration of keyframes by selecting and dragging them while holding Alt on the last or first keyframe. This will adjust the timing of your animation by reducing or expanding the space between keyframes. Now let's talk about how sequencing layers will also make our animations better. Sequencing means offsetting layers in the timeline and can be done manually. I would avoid this if you have more than 4 layers. Let's look at how you can sequence layers automatically. As you can see, I have a circle that I've animated to move from the bottom to the top while scaling up from 0. Now I'll duplicate it 8 times and arrange the layers in my scene using the Align panel options. To sequence these 8 layers, select them in the order you want them to animate in. This is important as After Effects will implement this order when sequencing them. Now I'll move forward on the timeline by the number of frames I want them to be offset by. In this case, I'll do it by 5 frames, and then proceed to trim the layer to this duration. In my case, I can do this by pressing Ctrl, Alt, and comma on my keyboard. On Mac, it should be Option plus the right square bracket. Now all I have to do is right-click over the layers and select Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers, and click OK in the window. Now all my layers will be sequenced in the order I selected them, and all that is left to do is select them all and drag the end of the layers to the end of the timeline. If we play the animation, you can see how this looks. Remember that if you want to change the position of a layer or layers that already have position keyframes, you can do so by parenting them to a null object if needed. Conclusion. A big part of what improves the quality of our animation projects is not only based on the quality of the content and assets, but also on how well the animation is paced through its rhythm and timing. In the end, we want to have the viewers engaged in the content we are presenting and make it easy for them to follow, learn, and understand what they are watching. As we've now learned, this starts at the storyboard and continues throughout the animation process. In addition to this, we saw how we can add motion like overshoot to our animations that will make them feel more organic and realistic. We also saw that it's really easy to do and achievable by adding one extra keyframe to our animation process.